"Don't get in the car, mister, please. There's something wrong under it." The words came from somewhere near his left knee. Callum Fairweather had been a senior partner at one of Ottawa's most respected law firms for 22 years, and in all that time, no one had ever stopped him on the steps of a courthouse with quite that particular combination of urgency and politeness. He looked down. The boy was small, 6, maybe 7 years old, with a winter jacket that was one size too big and boots that didn't match in color. His eyes were the kind of serious that children's eyes shouldn't be, the kind that comes from spending too much time watching adults instead of playing with other kids. He was holding a paper cup of hot chocolate with both hands, and some of it had slopped over the rim onto his fingers as though he didn't seem to notice. "Excuse me," Callum said. "Under your car." The boy pointed toward the black Lexus idling at the bottom of the steps. Callum's driver, a man named Frank who'd worked for the firm for 11 years, was standing by the rear door with his hand already on the handle. "I saw a man do something. Before you came out, Callum Fairweather had just won a case that had taken 4 years to build. A wrongful dismissal suit against one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country, on behalf of a woman who'd been let go at 58 after 3 decades of service. The jury had come back in just under 3 hours. He'd shaken 17 hands in the lobby before he'd made it to the door. His wife was waiting at a restaurant on Elgin Street with a reservation for 2, a bottle of Burgundy already breathing on the table, and a smile he'd been looking forward to since 6 that morning. He almost kept walking. Instead, he crouched down so that his eyes were level with the boy's. "What's your name?" "Theo." "Theo. Okay." Callum glanced at the car, then back at the boy. "Tell me what you saw." Theo explained it. The way children explain things, in the order it happened to him, not in the order it would make most sense to an adult. He'd been waiting on the steps for his grandmother, who'd gone back inside to look for her scarf. He'd been watching cars because he always watched cars. He liked the way the exhaust came out in the cold. And then a man had walked over to the black one. Not casual, not like he was checking a tire, crouched down very fast near the back left wheel, and then walked away even faster, toward the far end of the block, where he turned left without looking back. "What did he look like?" Callum asked. Theo thought about it with the seriousness of someone taking an exam. Gray jacket, like the color of the sidewalk. He had a red hat, but he took it off and put it in his pocket before he left. He was on the phone before, but not after, and he had a bag. One of those bags people put tools in. He paused. "He smelled like cigarettes. I could smell it from here." Callum stood up slowly. He looked at Frank, who had heard none of this from the bottom of the steps and was still waiting, patient as always, hand on the door handle. Something moved in Callum's chest. Not fear, exactly. More like the particular alertness he felt in a courtroom when a witness said something that didn't quite line up. He held up one finger to Frank. Then he took out his phone. The officer who responded was named Sergeant Veronica Osei. She arrived within 4 minutes, which surprised Callum and did not seem to surprise Theo at all. By then, Theo's grandmother had reappeared at the top of the courthouse steps, scarf in hand, and had descended in a controlled panic when she saw her grandson standing beside a man in a good suit and 2 uniformed officers. Her name was June Hadley. She was perhaps 70, with arthritic hands and the quiet dignity of a woman who had learned to manage worry without showing it. She put one hand on Theo's shoulder and looked at Callum with an expression that asked several questions at once. "He stopped me," Callum said simply. "He may have done something important." Sergeant Osei asked Theo to walk her through it again. Theo did, adding a detail he hadn't mentioned to Callum. The man had worn a watch with a silver face, and he'd checked it twice. Once before he crouched, and once after. The bomb disposal team arrived 11 minutes later. Callum stood on the courthouse steps with June Hadley and Theo and watched them work. Frank had been moved back, the street had been closed. A small crowd had gathered at the far end of the block, and a woman with a CBC microphone was trying to get past the barricade. Callum's phone buzzed. His wife, Marguerite, he answered. "I'm going to be late," he said. "I heard something on the radio," she said. "Was that? I'll explain when I get there. I'm fine." He looked down at Theo, who was watching the scene with the calm attention of someone who had already decided how he felt about it. Not frightened, not excited, exactly. More like someone who had done a necessary thing and was now simply waiting to see what happened next. "How did you know to tell me?" Callum asked him. "You could have just walked away." Theo considered this. "My grandma says if you see something and you don't say anything, then what happened after is a little bit your fault." June Hadley made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I don't know where he gets the dramatic version," she said, but her hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. 15 minutes later, Sergeant Osei walked back toward them. Her face was professionally neutral, but there was something in her posture that told Callum everything before she spoke. "Mr. Fairweather," she said, We're going to need you to come with us. The device had been real, compact, deliberately placed, positioned to cause maximum damage at ignition. The technician, who briefed Callum, used words like sophisticated and intentional placement in the even tone of someone who had learned to depersonalize danger as a professional habit. It did not feel depersonalized to Callum. He sat in an interview room at the police station on Elgin, 3 blocks from the restaurant where his Burgundy was still breathing, and he tried to think clearly. The case had been high profile. He knew that. The telecommunications company had fought hard, had hired aggressive outside counsel, had made it unpleasant in ways that were legal and a few ways that had required a formal complaint to the Law Society. But a car bomb was something different. A car bomb was a different category of human decision entirely. Sergeant Osei asked him to go through the last several weeks. Who had threatened him, explicitly or implicitly? Who had something to gain from his death? Who knew which courthouse, which date, which car? The last question was the one that snagged. Not many people had known the specifics. His assistant, who had been with him for 9 years and whom he would have trusted with considerably more than a parking arrangement. Marguerite, Frank, his driver, and the 3 other partners who'd been CC'd on the scheduling memo he'd sent the previous Thursday. He mentioned all 4 names. He did it with the same uncomfortable precision he used when cross-examining witnesses he didn't want to hurt. Osei wrote them down without reaction. "We'll need to speak with all of them," she said. "Yes," Callum said. "I know." The first 48 hours were strange and suspended, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Callum stayed at a hotel rather than going home, a precaution the investigators had suggested until they understood the full picture. Marguerite came to him. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and did not say any of the things he expected her to say. She did not tell him it would be all right. Or that he'd probably just made an enemy in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or that these things happened to people who did high-profile work and usually didn't amount to anything in the end. She just put her hand over his and sat with him in the particular silence of people who have been married long enough to know when silence is the correct answer. The investigation moved quietly and then very fast. On the 3rd day, Sergeant Osei called him in the morning. She told him that the investigation had identified a person of interest. His name was Stuart Alderton. Callum sat very still when he heard it. Stuart Alderton had been the 3rd name on that CC list. Not a partner at the firm in the traditional sense. He'd made partner 6 years ago, after a career trajectory that Callum had personally supported in 2 separate performance reviews. He'd been on the opposing side of 2 cases that Callum had argued in the past 5 years. He'd lost both. But it wasn't the professional rivalry that made Callum's chest go cold. It was the memory, sudden and specific, of Stuart's voice in the partners' meeting 3 weeks ago. Controlled and pleasant, the way his voice always was. "The Mercer case is getting a lot of press. Probably makes you a target, Callum. You should be more careful." He'd said it like a friendly observation. Callum had thanked him and moved on. Osei said they had surveillance, footage, a gray jacket, a red hat removed and pocketed, a watch with silver face. Callum said nothing for a long moment. "He was on the CC, he finally said. "Yes, he knew the car, the time, the location, yes." There was another pause. "He came to my retirement party last spring," Callum said. "He gave a speech. He talked about integrity." "Mr. Fairweather," Osei said, not unkindly. "That's often how it is. Stuart Alderton was arrested on a Thursday morning. The charges were serious. The evidence, Callum was told by a Crown prosecutor he knew vaguely from a bar association dinner, was substantial. There would be a long process ahead. There always was. Callum sat with that knowledge for a day. He was good at sitting with difficult knowledge. It was part of the job, and it had been part of the job for a long time. But there was something he kept returning to that had nothing to do with the law, or with Stuart Alderton, or with the long and grinding process that would now unfold in some other courthouse on some other day. He kept thinking about a boy in mismatched boots, holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. June Hadley had not left him her number, but he'd remembered her full name from Sergeant Osei's notes. His assistant had found a listing. He called on a Saturday afternoon. She answered on the 3rd ring with the careful hello of someone who doesn't recognize the number. "Mrs. Hadley, my name is Callum Fairweather. Your grandson spoke to me outside the courthouse last week." A brief pause, then he told me you crouched down to talk to him. He mentioned that particularly. He said you talked to him like a person. Callum was quiet for a moment. He was the most observant person at that courthouse, he said, including the security guards. June Hadley laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. Then she coughed. The cough went on a little too long. "Hadley, are you all right? Bronchitis, going on 3 weeks. She dismissed it efficiently. "I'm managing. Can I ask why you and Theo were at the courthouse that day?" Another pause. Smaller this time. "Custody hearing," she said. "Not for Theo. For my daughter's children. My daughter is. She's been having a difficult time. Theo has been living with me. The hearing went fine. We're fine. She said it with the particular emphasis of someone who has learned to say we're fine before anyone asks. Because once people ask, the we're fine becomes harder to maintain. Callum asked if he could come by. She said that seemed unnecessary. He said he thought it seemed very necessary. She gave him an address in Vanier. The apartment was on the second floor of a building that was clean and well-maintained in the way that comes from the effort of the people living in it rather than the landlord. June Hadley answered the door in slippers and a cardigan, with the expression of someone who had decided to be gracious about an intrusion. Theo was on the sofa behind her, doing something with a deck of cards that appeared to be organized by a system only he understood. He looked up at Callum. "You're the man from the steps," he said. "I am." Theo nodded as if this confirmed something and returned to his cards. Callum sat across from June Hadley at a table that had been cleared of what looked like a school project, a half-finished map of the provinces with the northern territories outlined in green. He told her, in plain language, what had been found under the car. He watched her face, go through several things quickly, shock, then relief on Theo's behalf, then the slow arrival of something he recognized as the particular exhaustion of people who give children accurate information about a frightening world because they don't know what else to do. He didn't know, June said finally, looking at Theo's back. I mean, he knew something was wrong. He didn't know what. He knew enough, Callum said. He knew to say something. That's actually most of it. She was quiet for a moment. His mother is working on it, she said suddenly, as if she'd been waiting to say it to someone. People think, when a child is living with the grandparent, people assume. But she's working on it. She just needs time. I'm not assuming anything, Callum said. She looked at him. She had the look of someone evaluating whether that was true. No, she said after a moment. I don't think you are. He asked about the bronchitis. She said her family doctor was booked 3 weeks out and she was managing with tea and over-the-counter medication. He asked about Theo's school. She said it was a good school, a bit far, and the bus was sometimes unreliable. He asked about the custody hearing, and she said it had gone well, but that these things had a way of requiring follow-up, and follow-up required documents, and documents required time, and time was the thing she had the least of. Callum listened. He'd spent 30 years listening to people tell him about the machinery that ground them down, and he'd become good at hearing which parts mattered most. When he left an hour later, he had her email address, her family doctor's name, and a list of 3 things he intended to do. The first was to connect June Hadley with a colleague, not in his firm, but someone he trusted, who specialized in family law and did a portion of her work pro bono for circumstances exactly like this one. He made the call from the car. His colleague said she'd be in touch by Monday. The second was to call a specialist he knew through the hospital foundation he sat on and arrange for June's bronchitis to be seen properly this week, not in 3 weeks. It turned out to be early-stage pneumonia, caught before it required anything more than medication and rest. June called him when she found out and said she wasn't sure how to feel about a near stranger intervening in her medical care. Annoyed, she decided, but also grateful. So I'll split the difference. That seems fair, Callum said. The third thing took a little longer. He had bought the small house in New Edinburgh 5 years ago as an investment, a semi-detached, well-maintained in a neighborhood with good schools. He'd been renting it through a property management company. The tenant was leaving at the end of the month. He called the management company on a Wednesday morning and told them he'd be taking it back. Then he called June Hadley. She told him she wasn't a charity case. He told her it wasn't charity. It was a fair market lease on a house in a neighborhood with a reliable school bus route. If she didn't want it, that was entirely her right and he'd find another tenant. But if Theo needed to be closer to a good school and she needed to stop spending 2 hours a day on transit, and they both needed a home where the follow-up custody documents could be organized on a real dining room table, then perhaps she'd consider it. There was a long pause. You talk to him like a person, she said again. Not a repetition, more like she was using it to explain herself to herself. He is a person, Callum said. A very careful one. Another pause. I'll think about it, she said. She called back in 2 hours and said yes. Moving day was a Saturday in early December. Callum did not offer to help with the physical moving. He understood that there were limits to what a stranger's involvement should look like, and that June Hadley had a brother and a neighbor and a considerable amount of dignity, none of which needed him carrying boxes up a flight of stairs. But he did bring something. He arrived in the late afternoon, when most of the boxes were in and the furniture was arranged in the provisional way of a first day in a new place. June was in the kitchen with her brother, arguing about where the kettles should go. Theo was in the living room, standing at the window, looking out at the street. Callum stood in the doorway. Good view, he asked. Theo turned. He thought about the question seriously, which was apparently just how he thought about things. You can see the whole block from here, he said. And both corners. Is that important? My grandma says you should always know your exits, Theo said, and your entrances street. The bare trees, the light already going at 4 in the afternoon, the neighbors' lights coming on one by one in the early dark. She's right, he said. He set the bag he'd brought down on the floor of the living room. Inside it was a book, a large illustrated atlas of Canada, with proper maps and geological surveys, and a section on the Northern Territories that went on for 30 pages. He'd found it at an antiquarian bookshop on Bank Street, the kind of place that still smelled like paper and took its time. Theo looked at it for a moment. Is this for me? It's for you. Theo picked it up with both hands, the way he'd held the paper cup of hot chocolate, carefully, like it mattered. He opened it to a page somewhere in the middle and studied it with the expression of someone beginning a serious project. Thank you, he said. He said it the way adults mean it, with weight. Thank you, Callum said. June Hadley appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of tea. She looked at the book in Theo's hands. She looked at Callum. Stay for tea, she said. Not quite a question. Not quite an order. Something in between. He stayed. Outside, the December dark came down over the neighborhood. The streetlights came on. Theo sat cross-legged on the floor of the new living room, with the atlas open across his knees, tracing the long coastline of Baffin Island with one finger, reading the names of inlets and bays with the quiet concentration of someone who already understands that the world is larger than it first appears, and that most of what matters in it is what you notice when no one thinks you're paying attention.